Right, it's just gone a couple of minutes past, so I think we'll get started. And if anyone else is joining us, I'm sure they'll filter through by the time we get into the good stuff. So yeah, welcome everyone. It's the fourth session of the ESG panel's ESG event series. So today's session is on greenwashing and what you as a PR professional can do to avoid it. I'm delighted to hand you over to Chris Tucker, who will be moderating today's session and will give the house rules and provide an introduction for the rest of today's panelists. So hope you enjoy and yeah, all the best.
Thanks, Liam. Thank you very much. Yes, this is the fourth of the 4 webinars that the ESG panel plan to hold, but I'm sure, in fact, I know that's not going to be the end of the story. We have a number of skills guides coming out as well. So I'm just going to pop in the chat box here a link to our page on the CIPL website so you can keep up to speed with what we're doing. The aim of the ESG panel is to demystify and educate us more on the issues around ESG. So that's our aim and our objective. So far, the webinars have covered what is ESG, what next for ESG, and the role of the ESG communicator. Today, we will be talking about a subject many of us are interested in and possibly a little bit afraid and nervous of, which is the subject of greenwashing. And we've got an amazing panel here today, which I'll introduce in a moment. Each of them will speak, and then obviously there will be time for Q's and A's. Just a few housekeeping points. As Liam has said, we are recording the session, and Liam has said the recording will be up on our YouTube channel and on our page by tomorrow. So that will be amazing. So you can catch up if you need to dip out and you miss anything, or you want to watch it again, it will be there. We will be using the Q&A box really for your questions, as I suspect the chat box might get a little bit busy. So do please put your questions in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen. And Quentin is then going to moderate the Q's and A's after the speakers. So we've got a fabulous panel here. Miles Lockwood here, as you see, is the Director of Complaints and Investigations at the Advertising Standards Authority, and he leads the organisation's work on climate change and the environment. If you follow these issues in the media, you will be aware, perhaps to say to Miles before we went on air, he's been rather busy, and I'm sure you will have read about some of the rulings that Miles will have been involved in recently, and he has agreed to give us some insight into how to understand them better and therefore improve our own practice as a result of that. We also have Matt Bourn here, who's a Director of Communications for the Advertising Association. Matt's role includes supporting the ad industry and the plan to rebuild public trust in advertising, steering the industry's work around climate action, including the formation of Ad Net Zero. So it's quite interesting to have the regulator and the main industry body here, and it'd be interesting to hear how they work together, how Matt helps his members understand how to communicate these issues. And as a PR industry, I think we have a lot to learn there from the work that Matt has been doing. So thank you, Matt, very much for joining us. Duncan is a member of the ESG panel. He's a divisional director at Man Bites Dog, which is a sustainability-focused marketing and comms agency. He spent the last decade working in sustainability communications for a wide range of clients, large, medium, and small as well. So Duncan's going to be talking about what he is seeing from his clients in this atmosphere we're in at the moment, and these challenges we face at the moment about communicating ESG credentials in the correct way. Quentin, as I say, is going to be our interlocutor, as it were. He's going to be our, well, he threatened to be a little bit of a Jeremy Paxman. I don't know, Quentin, if you want to say a little bit about your role on the ESG panel. Grateful for the work that you've done as well.
Well, I'm mostly practicing in New York at the moment. I teach at a couple of universities over here. My last book was about business ethics, and I'm a practicing journalist as well as a PR consultant working in the crisis space. So my role will be to make sure that when our participants are putting in questions, our panelists are actually answering them. So that's where the Jeremy Paxman role comes in.
And Quentin is in New York at the moment and is seeing the effects of wildfires.
Yes, very much so. It's a bit hazy outside.
hopefully you'll be able to stay with us. It looks a little bit dark in your room, but hopefully all is well. So let's start.
It's still only breakfast time, in fact.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Hopefully it will brighten up. So let's start with Miles. So Miles, I'm going to hand over the floor to you to tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing. And as I say, it'd be great to get some insight into some of those newsworthy decisions. In fact, I think most of your decisions are newsworthy, but let us know what's been happening and what we need to know as an industry.
Some more newsworthy than others. We've had some this week though, which are quite newsworthy. Anyway, look, it's great to be here. Thanks for the kind introductions. Such an important topic, this, such an interesting topic as well, and you are such an important group to be talking to. So really honoured to be here today, and really looking forward to the discussion. So to start off, and we've got 10 minutes, so I haven't got very long. And in preparing for this, spoke to Chris and I understood that perhaps the understanding of what the ASA system is not that great. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just talking about the ASA system, who we are, what we do. I'm then going to spend a little bit of time just talking about the rules. And again, 10 minutes, I'm not going to be able to do much, but I just want to kind of bring some of the green rules to life by way of some examples, just to give you sort of a flavour of what to do or what not to do. And then in finishing off my introductory comments, I'm just going to give you just a few thoughts on why this matters, why this should matter, why it matters to us, why it matters to you. So there we go. So anyway, we're the UK ad regulator. We've been around since 1962, and we regulate all kinds of media, so non-broadcast, broadcast, online, increasingly important to us. Website claim from companies' own websites and their own social media channels, paid for advertising, obviously, all of those things that you would expect, video on demand and so on. And we do that these days via kind of a mixture of reactive and proactive methods. I mean, years ago, we used to be known, as a complaint handler. We would wait for complaints to come into the complaints post bag, and we would pick them out to do with ones that were useful. These days, we still do that, but we do a lot more. So we proactively launch our own investigations, but we also take thematic issues and sectoral issues. And actually, climate change is an absolute shining example of where the ASA system has gone, okay, this really matters. We're going to set a project up, and we're going to use all of the tools at our disposal: investigation, education, research, enforcement, partnership working. So we're doing all of those things on this very important topic. What do we do? Well, we administer the advertising codes, and a pretty obvious, but I think probably important point for this group. Obviously, you're PR professionals, and so your world straddles, advertising and editorial. Obviously, just to make the point that we only look at advertising. So at the beginning and the outset of our work, we have to think, well, is this thing that we're looking at an ad? If it isn't, then it's outside our remit. So there's just that point to bear in mind there. And sometimes it can be a little bit hard to make those judgments. But having said that, CMA have a green claims code, and obviously they can view those things. And the code they operate, the code we operate, is pretty much the same, really. So onto the ad codes. What are they? Well, they kind of divide into two areas: misleadingness and social responsibility, or harm and offence, if you like. And the balance of work is we spend about 80% of our time on misleadingness issues. And when we talk about misleadingness, we are effectively applying the law, the consumer protection regulations. So the ad codes in respect of misleadingness effectively are a reflection of the law, and that's necessary. And when we look at misleadingness, we obviously have to take each ad on its own terms. So we have to look at the ad in its own context, and we have to apply a particular test, which is called the average consumer and transactional decision test. It used to be the kind of man on the Clapham omnibus, test, but essentially, does this ad which does the consumer to which is added addressed? What are they likely to take out from it, and are they likely to make a transactional decision on the basis of what it contains or doesn't contain? And then you've got within the codes, in terms of green rules, you've got sort of three sections. You've got general rules on misleadingness, which apply to everything, green claims. You've then got a section on environmental rules, a specific section in the codes on environmental rules. And then you've got this issue of social responsibility as well, but we don't see a lot of that at the moment. It's changing. Social responsibility is an increasingly important and I would suggest almost risky issue, but we don't actually see that many complaints through that lens at the moment. So anyway, no time to teach in the rules, but I'm going to give you some examples in practice, which will bring it to life. So, at the most obvious, at the most basic, don't mislead. Ads should not mislead. And it's almost, too obvious to be true here. But here's an example. we had an example last year, a company called Evergreens, who were selling their plastic grass, the green plastic grass that people put outside in the back gardens, and they said it was eco-friendly, recyclable, 100% recyclable. Well, plastic grass is not eco-friendly by any definition. It replaces biodiversity, it smothers lawns. It's just clearly misleading to call plastic grass eco-friendly, but nor is it recyclable, because it was only recyclable if you delivered it to a factory in the Netherlands. So it's just quite obviously misleading. It's just basic stuff. This another important aspect of the rules is, and this is fundamental to the environmental rules, is you have to make the basis of environmental claims clear. So a good example here, Outpro on the side of buses a couple of years ago, they're almond milk, good for you, good for the planet. But the ad didn't specify what was good for the planet. Was it because the packaging was recyclable, or was it because the almonds were produced in a sustainable way? Was it because they'd reformulated the product from some earlier design? The ad didn't make it clear, and that is a breach of the environmental rules. Third one, environmental claims must be based on the whole life cycle of a product or service, unless a more limited claim can be made. Tesco Plant Chef range, they were selling their Plant Chef burger. They said it was better for the planet than meat. And we said, okay, well, you need to prove that. This is a processed product which contains all manner of, or could contain all manner of processed plant-based items from UK or from around the world. You therefore need to show us a life cycle assessment of that, and they didn't have one. Just because it's a plant-based product doesn't necessarily mean that it's automatically in all circumstances going to be better than an equivalent meat product. I know that's slightly controversial, but but as we know, soya-based products, rip up the Amazon. There are issues in Malaysia with palm oil, so on. So you have to hold advertisers to the same standard, even if they are making on the face it what looks like a better claim. Another important one, misleading statements. So what you say is not true. Oatly said in an ad, Oatly generates 73% less CO2 versus milk, which we thought consumers would understand would be referring to all of Oatly's plant-based products and measured against all types of milk. But when we made inquiries with them, the claim was only based on one specific product and only compared against whole cow's milk. The next one, this is a big one at the moment, misleading omission. So what you say may be true, but you omit key information that consumers need in order to be able to make an informed decision. And very topical, yesterday we published 3 rulings about the oil and gas sector. And one of those, Shell, for example, put ads out which were making broad-based claims about the investment they were making in various forms of green energy. And they were making that claim to sort of make the point that, we're a company well on the way to transform our services to become more green. But the ad gave no explanation as to how significant those activities were today as a balance of the company's total activities. And our council decided that was material information. And then finally, whole substantiation that backs up an objective claim. So Etihad, earlier this year, they said you can fly sustainably with Etihad because they had removed plastic cutlery from flights. Now, clearly, the removal from plastic cutlery cannot substantiate such a bold claim as sustainable flying. So there you go. That I hope it sort of brings to life in a shorthand way what the ad codes are in general terms in relation to green claims. The solution. We'll get onto the solution in the debate. I think there are solutions for what we're tripping up, and the solutions are actually often simpler than you think. But too often we do see claims that are too big, too vague, too unqualified, too absolute, and that's the problem we've got at the moment. Anyway, I'm going to finish in a second, but I just want to wrap up by talking briefly about why we're doing what we're doing, why this matters. We've got this big multi-year project, and we've got it for a reason, and that's because advertising is increasingly coming into the frame as more of a problem in environmental terms, certainly for some commentators. And the reality here, the big picture here, is that government has set net zero targets, ambitious net zero targets. UK to be net zero by 2050. 78% of that reduction is supposed to be achieved by 2035. The government was advised in 2019 by the Climate Change Committee, which is the expert body which advises government on net zero targets, that those targets will only be met with carbon reduction and consumer behaviour change taking place, particularly in some key areas. Now think about that. We're being told, government's being told, that consumer behaviour change will be needed over the next few years if legal targets are to be met. And advertising is obviously one of the key drivers of consumer consumption behaviour. So advertisers, businesses can either choose here to be a force for good or a force for ill. That's the decision we've got to make. And that's why we're placing so much resource into this, because we've got to ensure that in a few years' time, when the books are balanced, people are talking about advertisers as being on the good, the saviours here rather than the problem. Because if advertising is seen to be the problem, it is only a matter of time, we think, before governments will intervene with statutory regulation in the same way that they've done with things like high fat, sugar and salt food, or in the same way that you're seeing in France, where there are statutory interventions taking place. Thank you very much.
Wow, that's so interesting, Miles. And it was interesting what you were saying about challenging these claims. Because one of the things we like to say as a PR profession is that part of our role is to hold the mirror up to the organisation and challenge them on what it is that they want to say. But this is a new and evolving area. So I think there is an onus on us to do what things we're doing now, which is to get educated, Miles, so that we can challenge in that way. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is the opportunity, isn't it? We've got to have an open and honest debate about it. And I think we are. I see it. I'm attending lots of these sessions. There's a huge amount of interest at the moment. Yes, there is a lot of concern, worry, but by discussing these issues and by getting ahead of the curve, I'm convinced, we've got a good opportunity to make a difference here. I'm an optimist. I think most companies are trying to do the right thing. They need help, and we're here to help. We're not just here to carry a big stick. And I think Matt's going to come on to some of the help that's out there.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. And it's a brilliant summary, Miles. Thanks for that. And hello, everyone. So very, very quickly. So at the Advertising Association, I'm the comms director. So I guess I've got two hats on when I'm talking to you today. I'm going to build off the advertising bit, but then I'm going to come into comms and sort of talk about the comms issue that we've got. At the AA, we have a mission which is all about responsible advertising and its contribution to economy and society. And right at the heart of that sort of responsible definition is being trusted, being inclusive, and being sustainable. And the climate action work stream, as Chris mentioned, now Ad Net Zero is something that I've been working on over the past 4 years now at the AA. And we have an interesting relationship with the ASA. I was actually invited to go into the ASA and do a presentation early on when the climate change work stream originated. And I remember doing a presentation that said, look, if we thought tobacco was bad for the reputation of advertising, this is essentially tobacco times 100, because climate change is going to essentially have some kind of impact on every part of our lives and every part of the economy. And there will be some NGO voice within every part of the economy that will point to where businesses are not doing the right thing and where they're saying that within advertising. So we have to get hold of it. So we're hugely, from the Advertising Association's perspective, hugely supportive of the ASA's work in this area, and really, really encourage our advertiser community to consistently understand the rules. And I think the thing to be aware of, just purely from the ad point of view, is that the rules are going to continually evolve and develop. I think within the climate science, as we learn more, but also I think because of some of the impact that we'll see from climate change, I think there will also be a requirement for more self-regulatory interventions. Otherwise, as Miles has said, I think government could potentially do that, and we're certainly seeing lobbying voices already asking for that. So from the AA's perspective, we have a huge responsibility to make sure that our membership follow the rules of the ASA. What I wanted to touch on though in this conversation was, because we've got greenwashing as the title, and I noticed Miles never talked about greenwashing. He talked about misleading environmental claims. I think it's a fundamental point that we need to hang on to. Greenwashing for me is a term that has become almost a kind of ubiquitous term, which allows you to say, if you don't agree with my point of view, that's greenwashing. And so I think the debate around greenwashing is very tricky. And so I'm pleased that the ASA focuses in on that misleading environmental claims, because I think that is what this is about. Communicators in the UK and globally don't have an ASA. Right? We don't have that same. So when I'm communicating on behalf of the AA about our climate action and add net zero, I don't have something to refer to in quite the same way. I think that is a problem for communicators. But I think there are some fundamental principles that Miles has highlighted in the ASA code that exist in things like the CMA Green Claims Code, which every communicator should be across. So the CMA Green Claims Code, I think, is going to pop up in the Q&A kind of chat as one example of something to look through and really be clear. And it is about, you know, making sure that you have the evidence to essentially back a claim that you're making. Fundamentally, I think at the core of it is don't lie, either intentionally or unintentionally. Make sure you have the facts, the stats, the evidence behind a particular phrase or description that you're going to look to use. Because if you don't and you get it wrong, then you're going to come into trouble. There are lots of useful guides like the CMA's Green Claims Code. So the second one I'm going to point to is from the UN, which is a climate communications charter, essentially, and that has 3 fundamental points to it. I'm just going to quickly pop that back up on my screen. So the first is authoritative scientific information. So make sure you're getting it right, make sure your source is right, don't be misinformed, use the right sorts of messengers. The second is, when you're communicating, the UN encourages you to talk about both the problem and the solution. So acknowledge the problem as well as what you're doing to address it. I think there is a tension in that, which is that if the problem's too big and the solution is too tricky, people will be paralyzed with kind of inaction. And a lot of the research that I've been looking at is about positive framing. So here's a problem, but here's something that we can do in order to see some change, no matter how small it might be. So that positive framing of the solution is really important. But that's the tricky bit, because that's where you could overclaim. The third is around mobilize and action. The UN obviously is all about action and really sort of encouraging kind of young people to get involved and so on. But I very much recommend having a look at the UN. But probably the most useful, I'm coming to the sort of final point, the most useful tool that so I'm working on a book at the moment called Net Zero Advertising, which will be published next March. And the most useful thing I've come across is in Meta's sustainability advertising playbook. And in their playbook, the first section, their first recommendation is self-assess. And they have a diagnostic tool, which is 10 questions that a business should be asking itself. And they're scored 1 to 7 in terms of an honest self-assessment of where the business is at on its sustainability journey. And the recommendation within that diagnostic tool is the business fills it in, you know, the board, right the way through all of the functions. So you get a really honest self-assessment from the business where you're at. And then they grade you around 3 levels of maturity when it comes to sustainability. You're either an emerging company, which is essentially you have intention to reduce, but you're not necessarily there yet. You're an operational maturity, which is you're starting to target and systematically reduce. Or you're a leading company, in which case you're kind of setting the standards. And once you've identified where you're at as a business on that, it then provides you with a framework to say, okay, well, this type of claim, if we're only emerging, is completely uncredible at this point in our communications. So we should not make it. These are the types of things that we should be communicating. This is a no-go zone. And I would, if I was in-house and thinking about a sustainability communications campaign, I think this self-assessment tool would be my starting point with my board. And I would say, got to go through this. We've got to be all agreed that we're at this point in the journey. If you haven't got to that stage yet.
Fantastic. I'm going to endeavour to publish or to post in the chat box all the links that you guys have sent to me. Let's see whether I'm going to be successful doing that. Probably. There may well be too many of them. May well be too many. But we will get them out to you. I have to agree, Matt, the meta tool was a bit of an eye-opener. And this is exactly what people need.
Yeah,
as a really good starting place.
Yeah.
I've had the privilege of talking to you, Matt, and Miles, for a while now, getting ready for the events, and you've really made me see things very differently. The way you're talking about it's about misleading. The whole greenwashing thing is a little bit of a diversion. This is about misleading consumers so they're not able to make informed decisions. So why is it any different from every other form of advertising? Am I right to characterize it like that?
I think so. I mean, I get into we have terrible arguments at ASA Tales over this. My communications team told me off the other day because I'm doing another webinar. I did use the word greenwashing. Sorry, Matt. But that was because
it's in the title.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, that's because to be honest with you, I mean, I think you're right. The technical definition of greenwashing is making something a claim which is not true with intent. And
yeah, true.
Yeah, I think most companies aren't doing that. Some are, some outliers are. But I think sometimes greenwashing is just used as this kind of shorthand heuristic, for misleading, socially irresponsible claims. So sometimes I'm okay saying it, but I feel as though I have to sort of just say that thing first, which is, look, actually, strictly speaking, greenwashing has got this rather unpleasant sort of intent behind it, and I don't mean that if I do say it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think most companies and the ones I work with are desperately trying to do the right thing. But I think it's really helpful, as you said, Matt, to sort of think of it in terms of, it's asking the questions we as communicators would ask about anything. Is it true? Can you back it up? Where is your evidence, etc., etc. We're quite used to doing that, so it's that discipline, isn't it? Again,
it is. The thing that I find scary about it, in a way, is just how much climate science knowledge you need. So the next sort of thing that you then need to do with that is be really confident that you have someone around you or access to people that you can essentially sense check that information with. Yeah. We're all being asked to become climate scientists as part of the communications role.
No, that's anyway. When the previous webinar looked at the role of the communicator, we talked about the need to build those internal networks to make sure that you have the sources of information that you need. So yeah, it's a really good point. Duncan, over to you. What are you seeing with your clients in terms of dealing with this issue and some of the challenges Miles and Matt have outlined?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, just to reiterate your points, I found a lot of the sort of ideas, examples in even diagnostic tools that you guys have just been talking about incredibly valuable. So there's loads of really really important stuff in there. I think I really echo your point, Matt, that there is this kind of need to become something of a climate science expert within the communications role at the moment, and I guess that's maybe something that we need to embrace a little bit in order to be able to communicate more effectively. I think having heard all of that, I'm going to change the subject a little bit and focus on the kind of the flip side of the greenwashing challenge, the whole green hushing issue. And coming from the world of PR, it wouldn't feel right to me to look at the risks of misleading green claims, which I will use greenwashing as a shorthand for, if you'll forgive me, without also giving a little bit of airtime to the importance of not being cowed into silence altogether for fear of saying the wrong thing. So I think green hushing is kind of the opposite of greenwashing in a lot of ways. Greenwashing is speaking about sustainability without a strong foundation for your words, whereas green hushing is almost not speaking when you do have a foundation to do so. So on the surface, you might think that that sounds like a much smaller problem. So the difference between actively misleading people and simply hiding your light under a bushel. But I'd argue that maybe green hushing can actually be as big a problem, perhaps even a greater one, because of how it's impacting companies' ability or at least willingness to communicate and collaborate with one another. So I think there's kind of two fundamental issues within greenwashing. One is around brand and one is around impact. The brand one probably feels the most pressing to many organizations. It's the most kind of direct one, but the impact issue has potentially some quite global implications. I'm keen to look at it through both lenses from that PR standpoint. So first, the brand problem is really that if you've been following this series, you might remember Jihan mentioning in a webcast a few weeks ago that one of the dangers of the green hushing piece is that you alienate customers, you alienate colleagues as well, you alienate stakeholders, because they don't know what's going on, and they also don't know the good things that they stand for. Some might dismiss that and say that there are more important things that drive loyalty, like, for example, the size of your paycheck. But I think to do that would maybe be to underestimate the way that environmental and social concerns have sort of made their way into public and corporate consciousness. We recently conducted a bit of research actually that looked at employees within large corporates, and we found that 43%, so close to half of them, saying that they would leave a company that wasn't actively working to reduce its carbon emissions. So that's a problem, and it shows that values are commercially important when it comes to sustainability, and to dismiss them out of hand is potentially dangerous. So I think there's a lot in that in terms of the direct impact on an organization from a brand perspective. But then flipping over to the kind of the wider impact piece, I started this section by talking about how green hushing is essentially the opposite of greenwashing. It's also the opposite in terms of the kinds of risks that it represents. I think greenwashing, if I can be forgiven for using that term quite as much as I am, ultimately represents a threat to the business responsible, right? So they get called out if it turns out that they actually aren't quite doing what they should be doing to back up their rhetoric, or their rhetoric is misleading. Whereas green hushing is more a threat to progress overall. So that the kind of what economists might call a negative externality is something that might have a small impact on an individual business, but collectively quite big impact on something like carbon transition. I guess because most organizations, the challenge for most organizations, rather, the challenge of greening is huge, it's immense. It's one that's kind of too big really for an organization to figure out on their own. So they need that kind of transparency. They need to be able to understand what other organizations, what their peers, what their competitors are doing, and learn from those parallel struggles, and perhaps even actually directly collaborate with some of those peers in order to do that, in order to kind of move forward at the kind of speed and effectiveness that's needed with this very pressing challenge. And if everyone's keeping their cards close to their chest, then they all collectively lose. I think that's a perspective that we can't afford to lose track of, especially when you kind of think about it in those terms. Green hushing is a threat that maybe gets a bit less attention than it deserves. The ultimate point I want to make there, just around the whole green hushing piece, is that green hushing and greenwashing aren't the two options. You know, there's no either or. I think this is a point that's being echoed by Miles and Matt as well. They aren't really even opposites of one another. They're kind of just two different ways of getting it wrong. We can avoid both. It's essential for our businesses and for the planet that they're a part of that we do. And actually, as Miles said in the first part of the session, advertising and comms can be a force for ill or a force for good. I think avoiding greenwashing, avoiding those misleading claims means that you won't be a force for ill. But unless you also avoid green hushing, then maybe it's difficult to be a force for good. Final thing I want to say on this is just kind of bringing it back to the reality of running comms for a big organization, just unpack some of the challenges that I've seen regularly that actually kind of make green hushing something which happens, even though no one really wants it to happen. I think the challenge for anyone sort of in the world of sustainability comms is that fear of being misleading or being actively labeled as greenwashing. And when that happens, the lawyers tend to get involved. Don't get me wrong, lawyers are very useful. They don't have the same priorities though as communications professionals, from timelines right through to deliverables and objectives. They aren't really pursuing the same goals. They're looking to essentially de-risk above all else. So it's a challenge, and it means that I think developing an effective relationship not only with legal departments but also with the kind of leaders of the business who hopefully are starting to really understand these issues in a lot of depth means that you can overcome some of the challenges and hesitations. But it's not something that comms alone can solve. It's something that will really pervade the whole business if we're to successfully overcome green hushing and not stray anywhere near greenwashing.
No, interesting stuff. I mean, how do you help organisations get over that fear, Duncan, at your agency?
It's a good question. As I say, it's the fear is only part of it. It's almost like a logistical challenge. It's putting all the pieces together to work out how everyone can be comfortable with what you're saying, whilst also in the confidence that you are saying the right thing. To Matt's point earlier, we are really all being asked to become experts in this to some extent. And I guess in the past, PR and comms was sort of we were the mouthpiece of our organizations, right? We didn't need expertise. We just needed to be able to articulate the expertise of others.
Good point, yeah.
In the new world, it's much more a question of actually some of that expertise has to lie with us, because we're ultimately responsible where the buck stops, and not knowing this stuff is going to get us and our organizations into hot water.
Yeah, so chance to skill up, hence what we're here to do. Fantastic. Quentin, have we got some questions? And I know Matt has to leave a little bit earlier because he's going off to do another one of these on his tour, as it were. But we have any questions there?
We do have one question, which I will throw out, but I will then come back to something else just to give people a chance to think about this one, because Charlotte has asked a fantastic question, but which people may want a little time to contemplate. What role do you see AI playing in this area? A force for good or a force for evil? That, I think, is a great question, tremendously complicated, and it may not be easy for people to come up with an answer. But maybe we should start with something I threw out into the chat about some of the pressures that different publics are putting on people. So far, a lot of the claims that people have been making, whether they're true or not, seem to have been aimed at consumer loyalty. It seems to me that there are a lot of markets, buying petrol, for example, airlines, where there isn't a great deal of consumer loyalty. People will be driven by price and convenience. Consumers are often transactional. But I see with my students, when people are trying to hire them as employees, they are very careful about what they say, because they know that employees will look into this. This is a long-term relationship. And I think the same is true of investors, though I don't have the same experience of dealing with that. Where do we think the main pressures are going to be on organizations? Are consumers driving it, governments, employees, investors?
So, go on, Miles.
I think they all are to an extent. I mean, I was on a call yesterday with the FCA and the CMA. The FCA are cooking up a whole new set of regulations for investments and investors. So you can see, sector by sector, there are different actors who are stepping into the space and applying pressure in different ways. I mean, our concern at the ASA is consumers, maybe. whether be they business consumers or general consumers. And carried out some research. Actually, we carried out research into carbon neutrality and electric vehicle claims last year. We've got some in the field at the moment on waste claims like recycling, which hasn't yet reported back formally, but it's quite interesting to, in both of those sets of research, it was a bit depressing. This actually, there was the consumers, the participants were telling us, yeah, we're really interested in this. We think something needs to be done about it. We think businesses are responsible, particularly big businesses. But when you actually delve deeper into some of the claims and actually you ask them to make sure, what would be more like less likely to make you purchase this product, price comes into play. So consumers' appetite to actually take personal responsibility is really quite limited, and that's quite worrying, I think, because
I think
something should be done about this, but not perhaps them themselves.
Yeah, I think it's also the case that people will say that they take X into account in making decisions, but their behaviour doesn't always bear that out. Matt, did you want to come in on this question?
So as part of the research for the book, I've been reviewing different customer insight in the UK, in the US, and essentially there's a small group of eco warriors who will buy something because it's sustainable, but the vast majority mass market will not pay a green premium for a product. They expect that product to be sustainable at the same price and as convenient to buy.
Or maybe a very small premium.
No, well, sadly
nothing.
not. Sadly not. No,
wow.
no. There is particularly in a cost of living crisis. Fundamentally, it has to be right for the pocket. Has to be right for you as a person, and then right for the planet. There's a group that essentially will do it because it's right for the planet, but the mass middle market are not going to do it unless you're delivering it to them. So where my head is at is on the sustainability communications for consumers. I think some of the behavior changes and some of the decarbonisation will happen without even consumers realising.
Yeah.
Right? They'll still buy their bags of frozen chips to pop into an oven for 18 minutes for a crispy treat for the family. Behind the scenes, McCain's may well have decarbonised the delivery of those chips. Okay, but the punter is not going to buy the chips because they've been decarbonised. Right, so that is going to come through government regulation, industry pressure. So a lot of the sustainability communications is within the B2B area, because it will be about what we've done with the potato industry in order to decarbonize our chips, and talking to government and industry about that. But there are going to be behavior change areas that really will come under pressure when it comes to consumers. And I think fashion's the most interesting one of those. I think there will be in travel, but, bluntly, people are not, unless the world, unless the worst comes true, people are going to still go away on holiday for a couple of weeks a year.
And people choose Ryanair because it's cheap. Now, they also cram in extra seats and they don't let you take luggage. So there is definitely a carbon saving, except that you've then got to drive to an out-of-the-way airport and forward out-of-the-way airport as well. So, it's huge.
I don't think sustainability, choosing a holiday, I was talking with the travel CMO, choosing a holiday, which hotel, you're still going to pick it on the pool. You're not going to pick it. It'll help if there's two hotels with a pool and one's got a green label. Yeah. You might go for that, but you're not going to, it's still about the pool. And that sounds, but that, and so there's an awful big responsibility in B2B communications, B2B publications that are driving the change and saying, look, this is your business will be more successful commercially if you get there faster than your competitors. If you're the one building the net zero economy, you'll get the investment and it will happen for you quicker. That's the argument to make.
And I think there is a question about employment. I know when I was at Shell in the 1990s and they were coming under a lot of fire from Greenpeace and Amnesty International, they were finding it difficult to recruit the best graduates. And that's what led a behavior change. And I see this in my students. They are heavily motivated by this. In the war for talent, I think this is a critical way of marking yourself out.
Yeah.
I think
Duncan,
coming
what
back to
did you-
Matt's point, and just wanted to add to Matt's point, having looked at some recently procurement policies, Matt, where you are seeing if you are a business and you are bidding for business and in a B2B environment, the number of areas you would need to satisfy, particularly the larger clients on when it comes to your ESG credentials. You're really seeing that come through the procurement channel, exactly the way you described.
I don't think we should encourage that.
Mm.
I mean, my view within the advertising industry is we have procurement companies, procurement departments, and, people like the AAR that sort of manage that pitch process. And they should be right at the heart of it is what's your, show me action on your sustainability practices within the ad process.
Yeah, interesting. Quentin.
I was just going to ask Duncan if he wanted to come in on this question.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm a little bit of a pessimist, hopefully in a helpful way. But I think the focus on consumers is often a bit of a misnomer, because ultimately there are so many micro decisions that need to be made every day around things like what foods you buy, what other items.
It's very transactional.
Exactly. So it kind of has to be transactional to an extent. I think what we underplay, we also talk about investors a lot. Investors have a really big influence here, and I think they're making a lot of really positive noises, doing a lot of really positive things to help move companies in the right direction. The thing we underplay, I think, is that employee piece, where we touched on at the end there. There's a huge influence because it's a lot less transactional for people who work within businesses. That it's their day-to-day life. It's 7-8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Those are the kind of people who are going to care much more and find it easy to care about the sustainable credentials of their business. So I think that employee piece is really undervalued, and people are kind of coming around to the idea of how important it is right now.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. So I've given you a little bit of a chance, albeit you were talking about something else, to think about Charlotte's question about AI. Great question. Do we have any idea how to answer it? Anyone?
I've got one very specific example, and it's a bit internally facing, but it's definitely a force for good for the ASA, because over the last couple of years we've developed our own data science function. So we are now using artificial intelligence on a daily basis to help us regulate. And I've got a really good example of that in practice. We've done some work recently with airlines, as you may know, which included some published rulings. But way before all of that happened, we started searching proactively for problem claims. So we've now got a sort of a data science model which scans online advertising every month now for green claims in the airline industry. And it's great because actually it's telling us there aren't many. So we wouldn't have known that before. So it's fantastic, because I love this, because you get all the usual campaigning groups saying something must be done about airline advertising. They're all, and we're now able to say, well, actually, we've called two out, Deutsche Lufthansa and Etihad recently through rulings. But no, this assumption that the internet is awash with sustainable claims by airlines, it's just demonstrably not true. So there you go. That helps.
Although what that means is they're not talking about sustainability.
Well, they're not making sustainable. They're advertising their services. They're just not making sustainable claims, and that's absolutely what they should be not doing. Because as our two rulings have recently pointed out, airlines trying to claim that they're sustainable using current technologies is just crazy. There are no current technologies that can substantiate a sustainable claim for an airline at the moment. You just can't do it. You may be able to do it in 30 years' time when sustainable aviation fuel, if that happens, and so on and so forth.
It might be possible to say you're better than your competitors.
Well, that's a comparative. And this. Look, that's a really important point, because too often, as Duncan was saying, this whole greenwashing versus greenwashing debate, everything gets disasterized into we can either say what we want, we can't say anything. When often it's small nuanced changes that allow for companies to make these sorts of claims. So if Deutsche Lufthansa has gone further along a pathway than Etihad, they could say they are more sustainable than their competitors. That's a comparative claim. That's a completely different kettle of fish to an absolute claim, where you are just saying outright, as Deutsche Lufthansa did, that we are protecting the future of the planet in their advert, which is just nonsense. But to the second point, AI, but in terms of AI's impact on advertising, well, it could be a force for good or a force for evil. I mean, it's quite early days at the moment. We've seen some examples of it in
I think that's true about AI across the board.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
We need to watch it.
Matt, Duncan, did you want to come in on AI?
Just a little point on the educational benefits of AI. I think there's something really helpful. ChatGPT, for example, is sort of the Wikipedia of the new world. It's not somewhere where you necessarily go to for information by itself, but it does help to point you in the right direction of some of the sources and sort of summarize in a quick and accessible way some of the things you need to know. So the AI can provide a really useful kind of a window into the world without having to spend as many years as perhaps we ought to really get under the skin of it. So it's a gateway. I think it's useful in that sense.
Okay, Catherine Hobrook raises an interesting question. There's also the fear of green botching, where organizations are waiting for the right time to shout about what you're doing to make sure their green initiative doesn't do more harm than good through unintended consequences. Is that something to consider when weighing the greenwashing, green hushing risks and benefits?
Yeah, I think it is. I actually think that we're moving to a world where I think full disclosure on a transition to net zero plan is going to need to be a constant because what good looks like now won't look good 12 months from now, 3 years from now. But the problem with that is that means I can't tell you what good is today. So the only way, in my mind, the only way you get through that is through a context piece around the overall journey. And so the science-based targets, kind of measurement, reporting publicly, and Miles, this is my sort of, broader view on advertising is at some point, the sort of, the kind of the context of a claim within a larger transition plan. And certainly I think from a comms point of view, particularly in B2B comms, I think that's where you got to have the confidence.
It's the same issue we face as individuals. Do I install solar panels now, or do I wait until there are better solar panels available next year? And as a business, you certainly don't want to be trailing the pack. You don't want to be below average in your performance, but sometimes leading puts you in a position where everyone else can leapfrog you, or you start to lead and then you make claims which are hard to stand up as more evidence emerges.
Yeah, Miles made the point about how how much the field is evolving, and also, Miles, you were saying about the ASA taking a proactive approach as well. So how can we as professionals keep up to speed with how your thinking is evolving? I mean, there's been a discussion around your views on carbon offsets and so on and so forth, but do you regularly publish somewhere your changing views or how your thinking is evolving? How can we keep up?
We do. We part of the project a couple of years ago, we put together advertising guidance, or our sister body, CAP, Committee of Advertising Practice, put together for the first place comprehensive guidance on environmental claims in one place. And it's effectively what it does. It helps businesses to navigate the different kinds of claims with reference to the rulings that we publish, and we update that every few months. It was last updated in February with further information about how we're tackling carbon neutrality claims in the light of our recent research and ongoing review, and we're about to update it again in the light of the oil and gas case we published yesterday, the HSBC ruling published last year, the airline companies we ruled against earlier on this year, and we've got a couple of rulings coming out next week as well on an issue. So there'll be this updated guidance available at the end of June. I'm going to quickly plug our e-learning. We've also got e-learning at the ASA. Again, we produce interactive e-learning, which is useful. And yeah, I would just say keep up to speed with news at the ASA, because we will have further information, for instance, around the end of July, on the outcome of a monitoring exercise we've been carrying out with carbon neutrality and net zero, which is such a massive issue.
Yeah.
We all know. the issue of offsets being, particularly neuralgic, and we have got some plans on that, which we'll be announcing shortly as well.
We have time for one more question, and Sarah Greenslade has asked a, I think, tremendously important question. What are the panel's tips to get a board of a not-for-profit, and we can think about other organizations as well, to think and act strategically in a way that supports sustainability?
Oh, Duncan,
tips to get the board to move on the issue.
I mean, it's such an important question, so because I mean, I think others have said in this call and elsewhere that in this day and age, you do need to get the whole company behind you. The days of this just being something that's run by the marketing department or comms department for the birds, there needs to be a whole system, whole business strategy behind this. I think Matt was talking about, having a strategy, knowing where you are in your journey, and it's got to start from the top, isn't it?
Yep.
So I suppose, boards have to understand that this is increasing their reputational risk for businesses.
Yeah.
That there is a risk of regulation, as we talked about in sectors. It's already happening, and the change comes from the top, I guess.
And Matt, actually, although he's had to leave now, had been talking about getting boards to do a self-assessment of where they think the organisation is. And the first question is, do some members of the board even have any idea where they are? Because if you put questions before them and they don't know the answers, then that of itself is going to communicate to them that they need to learn something. Duncan, did you have something to add on this?
Probably not loads, to be honest, but it is interesting, isn't it? There's that whole kind of a lot of animal charities, for example, use direct mail, plow millions and millions into direct mail to reach the demographics that they want to get to, and that's just by nature of the kind of the audiences that they want to target and most effective ways of reaching them. But obviously it's a very unsustainable thing in general. I think there is inevitably, despite that, an overlap between the sorts of people who are interested in non-profits in general, and the kinds of priorities that those people might have. That's going to be especially true when it comes to investors and employees. You'd imagine a lot of people who want to work for a non-profit are people who are relatively conscientious and who are going to care a lot about the implications of the work that they do, perhaps more so than in the regular corporate world. So you can only assume that those same pressures that organizations in the sort of financial services sector are going to be facing are going to be amped up for the not-for-profit sector.
Yeah, so it's back to this war for talent issue, that if you need to attract the best people to run for your or to work for your organization and to run it for the future, then you need to be able to show them that there's a reason they will sign up for a medium-term, long-term commitment. This isn't just about buying a bag of fries. It's I think, Duncan, it was you that was saying it's what you do day in, day out. It's also, you're probably anticipating it's going to be for several years. So you do the homework under those circumstances.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming up to sort of one minute left. I just wanted to remind people of your 5 CPD points you can bank, and also that the recording of the session will be up by tomorrow. We will try to get some tech stuff as well to people, particularly showing those links. I did manage to get the CMA link up and the Meta link up, but there's many more that I would like to put up. And obviously, don't forget, we have our CIPR sustainability courses, as well as the ones that Miles was mentioning as well, that the ASA run too. So there's lots out there. Do keep informing yourself on this important subject. And from the ESG panel, thank you for joining us, and we will carry on trying to help you keep up with that. So thank you so much, Miles, Duncan, and thank you, Quentin. You weren't that bad. You were quite gentle, I think.
Well, they answered the questions, in fact.
They did, actually. They did. Yeah, they did do what you asked them to. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Take care. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.